Steam rises, the spoon dips, and the cup settles into your hands with the same motions you've made for years. Yet the moment you take that first sip, something feels different. The taste sits heavier, the bitterness lingers longer. The smoothness you once expected has slipped into something duller, harsher, almost metallic. Many people assume it is their palate changing, but more often it is the coffee itself. Quiet changes in roasting, sourcing, and filler content can flatten flavor, raise acidity, and push your body to work harder against oils that are older, darker, and stripped of nuance. Some blends now carry more bitterness than balance, more burnt notes than real depth. And when that becomes the foundation of your daily routine, the effects add up in small, tiring ways. Still, most shoppers keep picking up the same jars out of habit, unaware of how far the cup has drifted from what it once was. Today, we pull back that curtain and reveal 5 coffee brands you should never drink again, and why their quiet decline matters more than you might think. Number 1. Nescafé Original. Nearly 1/3 of its price has climbed within a single year, and Nescafé Original sits at the center of that rise. 5 grams have disappeared from the jar that once carried a full 200. Those figures create a sharp outline before any flavor enters the picture. They offer the clearest starting point for understanding how far this long-trusted product has drifted from what it once represented. Recent retail comparisons highlight the same imbalance. The shelf cost grows steadily, while the quantity slips in small, calculated steps. That contrast stands out because this particular jar has long been treated as a baseline for instant coffee, the product people reach for without thinking twice. It held that position for decades, which makes its present trajectory far more striking than the changes happening to other everyday items. Familiarity once protected it. Now the numbers push against that protection. The issue becomes clearer when the production choices sit under a brighter light. Darker roasting hides uneven beans. Stronger bitterness compensates for aging oils that travel farther and sit longer before packaging. The blend leans heavily on Robusta, not for character, but for budget control, which shifts the drink toward a harsher profile. None of these changes appear dramatic when viewed in isolation, though together they reshape the cup into a blunt, simplified version of what built the brand's authority. The product still markets itself as reliable, yet the internal adjustments point in another direction entirely. The impact shows itself in subtle, persistent ways. The first sip feels sharper than expected. The second brings a dry edge that settles a little too firmly on the tongue. The aftertaste lingers without depth, carrying more bitterness than warmth. That progression becomes easier to detect when compared with the drink's earlier form, which carried a broader, calmer flavor. The newer cup leans heavily into roasted intensity rather than balance, leaving the drinker with a sense that something familiar has thinned out. This is not a dramatic collapse, but a slow narrowing of character, and it marks the kind of decline that becomes more obvious with routine use. Visual signs reinforce the same message. The jar appears unchanged at a distance, though closer inspection reveals lighter contents and a marginally raised seal where the weight reduction shows itself. The granules take on a darker, slightly oilier surface that often signals a heavier roasting strategy used to compensate for changing bean quality. The label design repeats old promises, but the product inside carries a different story. The discrepancy reveals itself through quiet details that only matter once a shopper stops long enough to read them. This is where the broader critique steps into view. The company behind Nescafé Original has expanded far beyond its core instant blend, pouring investment into flavored variants, premium sub-labels, ready-to-drink bottles, seasonal releases, new partnerships, and wide promotional campaigns. Each of these ventures adds reach, visibility, and market coverage. Yet these same moves spread the company's attention across an increasingly large portfolio where the classic red jar becomes just one item among many. Growth looks impressive on paper, though it often redirects energy away from refining the very product that built the brand's reputation in the first place. The effects of that redirection appear more plainly when the cup is compared with rivals. Blind taste tests show other brands closing the gap on flavor, while some supermarket coffees rise above this blend at lower price points. That shift suggests a reordering of priorities. Marketing remains strong. Distribution remains dominant. The product itself grows less competitive. This dynamic signals a company relying on loyalty rather than quality to maintain the position of its flagship jar. Loyalty can carry a brand only so far before the drink inside fails to justify its place on the shelf. Recognition settles in once these elements align. The familiar jar continues to sell on memory, yet memory alone cannot restore the qualities that supported its past strength. The coffee inside feels thinner. The bitterness stands heavier. The aroma loses its lift more quickly once opened. A product that once served as the standard for instant coffee now sits at the edge of its own decline. That shift does not register loudly. It shows up in the small details of daily drinking, and those details rarely reverse once they fall into decline. One more observation completes the picture. On the same supermarket aisle, another jar bearing the same parent company's name stands only a few steps away, wrapped in gold and positioned as a higher tier choice. That product carries its own story of drifting balance, though in a very different way. Where Nescafé Original reveals the cost of corporate expansion and quiet reformulation, its gold label sibling reveals how reputation can float above performance. Number 2. Nescafé Gold Blend. Independent blind tests from which place Nescafé Gold Blend squarely in the middle of the rankings behind supermarket options that cost far less, and that single documented result sets the tone for everything that follows. From my years of drinking it, the blend once carried a soft, mellow aroma that felt almost reassuring, the kind of scent that filled the room with a sense of calm before the day had even begun. Within the first breath of a freshly opened jar today, though the aroma rests flatter than expected, hovering somewhere between roasted cereal and faint cocoa, rather than the rounded, fragrant lift a gold label coffee should offer. Across genuine beans, the difference becomes more obvious. A cup brewed from real well-roasted coffee carries a layered scent that moves from bright acidity to gentle sweetness before settling into a grounded finish. The steam feels alive, the fragrance lingers, the cup tastes wider, deeper, and more deliberate. Gold Blend, by contrast, arrives with a smoothness that feels manufactured rather than grown, a softness created through processing rather than craft. By the time the cup settles on the tongue, the flavour narrows into a mild bitterness that hangs just long enough to feel slightly off balance. The mouthfeel stays thin, the finish drops away quickly. What should feel refined ends up feeling filtered, simplified, and smoothed into something that resembles coffee more than it expresses it. Past the rim, the contrast grows clearer. Real coffee carries tiny fluctuations, fruit notes, sharper edges, fleeting sweetness, and natural oils that shift with temperature. Gold Blend keeps none of that unpredictability. It stays steady in a way that feels almost too controlled, as if the blend has been pressed into uniformity. Under a clearer light, that consistency feels less like mastery and more like the result of heavy blending, deeper roasting, and the quiet use of beans chosen for reliability rather than character. It is polished, yes, but polished in the same way fast food is polished, predictable, calculated, and stripped of the very things that make the food worth remembering. When you look closely, the impact of that approach lands in a gentle but persistent disappointment. The cup does not offend, but it rarely impresses. The scent rises quickly and fades just as fast. The taste feels washed of complexity. The aftertaste sits neither comfortably nor unpleasantly. It simply remains faint and tired. Those who once bought Gold Blend for its smoother finish may still find comfort in its mildness, yet that mildness now reads more like a compromise than a choice. The drink promises refinement but delivers something closer to neutrality. Through that lens, the wider truth begins to surface. Nestlé does not build its coffee empire on purity, craft, or the preservation of flavour. It builds it on reach, volume, speed, and adaptation. Gold Blend is not the centerpiece of a roasting philosophy. It is a product shaped to fit a global model of expansion line, extensions, seasonal releases, flavoured variants, 3-in-1 sachets, promotional bundles, ready-to-drink cans, workplace solutions, hotel dispensers. Every few months, a new version appears. Another twist, another experiment, another bottle designed to mirror trends rather than push quality upward. The company's energy spreads outward rather than inward. Beyond the label, reports over the years describe a working environment defined by targets, efficiency pressures, and relentless scaling conditions that often echo the flavour its self-controlled, predictable uniform. A business that must serve dozens of markets, dozens of price points, and dozens of consumer categories cannot slow down long enough to protect the nuance of a single jar. That is not negligence. It is the philosophy required to survive at their scale. To be fair, they are not breaking rules. They pursue a strategy that fits their ambition. They operate legally, competitively, and openly in a market where growth matters as much as taste, sometimes more. They offer convenience. They offer stability. They offer a flavour profile millions of people recognise instantly, even if it has grown thinner over the years. None of these facts make them wrong for playing the game they have chosen. But we too hold a choice. If someone wants a cup that reflects real beans, real roasting, and real flavour clean, honest and shaped by care rather than calculation, this brand will not take them there. The label may shine, but the cup rarely does. And the most practical step is simple: if quality matters, look elsewhere. Number 3. Douwe Egberts Pure Gold. Compared with the ground that Nescafé has already lost, Douwe Egberts Pure Gold appears steadier at first glance, yet the surface hides its own quiet slide. After reviewing price lists and taste tests, the product shows a pattern that sits somewhere between expectation and letdown, a gap subtle enough to escape notice, but present enough to matter once the details are laid bare. In the longer view, that gap grows more pronounced because Pure Gold is marketed as a richer, fuller cup, something a step above, even though the evidence places it only slightly ahead of its red label rival. Once seen through that lens, the anchor facts sit firmly on the table. Pure Gold earned a mid-tier mark in the Which blind test, scoring the same as Nescafé Gold Blend and falling short of cheaper competitors that outperformed it on aroma, depth and finish. Given the taste profile people expect from a premium jar, this position feels modest rather than commanding, a result that highlights how price and reputation often rise faster than the product itself. That mismatch becomes the starting point for a more clinical look at what such blends can mean for long-term everyday drinkers. Under sustained intake, the body responds to these blends in ways that rarely announce themselves loudly. A heavier roast can irritate the stomach lining by increasing the concentration of certain acidic compounds, even when the drink tastes mild on the surface. At a cellular level, oils that have aged through long storage or extended transit lose stability, leading to oxidation that may contribute to a sluggish, unsettled feeling after repeated consumption. By common accounts, the issue is not toxicity or danger. It is the steady, low-grade strain that accumulates when the cup lacks the freshness and nuance found in better-handled beans. That strain often hides beneath routine surfacing only when someone pays attention to how their body feels after weeks or months of the same brew. A comment from Dr. Emma Derbyshire, a respected public health nutritionist in the UK, adds weight to this view. She has noted that harsh roast profiles and older oils can contribute to increased gastric stress when consumed regularly, a point that helps explain why some instant coffees leave drinkers feeling more fatigued or unsettled than they expect. Her words do not condemn the product. They simply shine a clearer light on what happens when flavour shortcuts and long supply chains become normal parts of a person's daily cup. The clinical truth is simple bodies react to patterns. Toward evening, the sensory side comes into focus. A scoop of Pure Gold offers a scent that feels warm but faint, a kind of flattened roast aroma that promises more depth than it delivers. The steam rises in a narrow column rather than filling the air, a sign of limited volatile oils that often correlates with older beans or heavier processing. The first sip lands softly but without direction, a gentle bitterness pressing forward while everything else remains muted. The mouthfeel stays light, almost hollow, and the finish falls away so quickly that the cup feels incomplete. It is not a bad experience, just a thin one, pleasant enough, but lacking the organic rise and fall that marks real fresh coffee. For a shopper expecting Pure Gold, the cup leans noticeably closer to bronze. By the end of the day, the human side enters the frame. A man who has bought this jar for years sits quietly at his kitchen table, wondering why he feels more drained lately. His sleep is fine, his meals are routine, his schedule hasn't changed, yet there is a lingering heaviness he cannot quite name, a kind of mid-afternoon slump that arrives earlier than it used to. He starts to notice a faint tightness after his morning cup, a dryness at the back of his throat, a mild discomfort that settles under the ribs in a way it never did before. None of it feels dramatic enough to alarm him. It simply wears on him day after day, an unwelcome guest he cannot place. One morning he pauses mid-sip and looks at the jar. He realizes he has trusted it more out of habit than satisfaction. The flavor no longer feels like something chosen, it feels inherited. The warmth he once associated with the brand has thinned into something he barely registers anymore. He tilts the cup, takes another swallow, and wonders not for the first time whether the decline he feels belongs to him or to the coffee he still thinks of as his favorite. Number 4. Asda Gold Roasted. Budget coffee should at least offer honesty, yet Asda Gold Roasted leaves a faint sense that something in the cup is missing long before anyone reaches the bottom. To be fair, no one expects a value blend to compete with specialty beans, but the gap here feels wider than price alone can explain, and that gap becomes clearer the deeper you look at how these blends are actually built. On closer look, the story moves quickly beyond flavor and into the machinery that shapes it. The first part of the system is the bean choice. Value lines often rely on Robusta, not for strength, but for cost control, and Gold Roasted fits that pattern neatly. By common practice, the beans selected for this tier come from lots that are perfectly safe, but lack the natural sugars, oils, and aromatic compounds that create complexity. They are sourced in bulk, traded quickly, stored longer, and roasted deeper to flatten inconsistencies. The roast isn't deep for character, it is deep for disguise. Through their own margins, suppliers must meet strict per kilo limits set by supermarket tenders, so the blend is tightened again and again until the flavor profile becomes narrow enough to stay stable, even as the bean quality shifts underneath. What disappears first is aroma. What disappears next is balance. What survives is bitterness, because bitterness holds its shape when every other variable is thinning. According to one factory worker who spoke anonymously in an industry interview, when the price target drops, the blend tightens. You lose aroma first, then balance, then depth. His words describe not wrongdoing, but a system working exactly as designed: lower cost, longer shelf life, fewer fragile notes that could break consistency. Over time, this becomes the signature of budget coffee, not just muted, but engineered to stay muted. The second part of the system is what gets added. Anti-caking agents keep granules from clumping after long storage. Moisture-stabilizing compounds help maintain texture. A darker roast masks the unevenness of raw beans and extends usable life. None of these additions break rules, and none of them are hidden. They simply shift the cup away from freshness and toward durability. From the shopper's angle, the result feels strong, but that strength comes from roast force, not bean quality. The cup holds together, but it holds in a rigid, flattened way, stiff rather than smooth. The motives behind these choices sit plainly in economics. Supermarkets rely on value lines to set price anchors, the low ticket that makes mid-range items look more appealing. For suppliers, survival means meeting those price points or losing the contract entirely. The process rewards efficiency, not flavor. Taking off a penny matters more than adding nuance. In that system, compromise isn't an accident, it's a condition of entry. And once flavor is no longer the organizing principle, the cup becomes whatever the price requirement allows it to be. Yet the supermarket still needs shoppers to feel good about picking it up. So the presentation steps in. A warm gold label suggests richness even when the cup leans thin. Strength numbers imply control over intensity. Shelf placement at eye level gives the impression of trust. The price sits just low enough to feel like a win, but not low enough to raise suspicion. Within this marketplace, quality becomes a secondary actor, while appearance takes the lead, a quiet trick of modern retail where value is measured more by perception than by substance. Taste confirms the structure behind the scenes. The scent rises weakly, a faint roasted note without lift or sparkle. The sip begins flat, then tips quickly into a short, clean bitterness. Nothing offensive, nothing memorable. The finish vanishes almost instantly, leaving only a shadow of roast rather than a trace of flavour. You drink it, you recognise it, and then it drifts away as if it never had anything more to say. Toward evening, that emptiness begins to settle in the mind, the sense that the cup was built to meet a number rather than to deliver a taste. Until the taste fades, that thought stays with you softer than a warning, but sharper than comfort. Number 5. Kenko Smooth Roast. For the last story, I'll share mine because Kenko Smooth Roast was the one coffee I carried with me for years. For a long while, I thought it would stay that way. It was the first jar I bought when I moved into my own flat, the one I took to work, the one I kept on the counter like a familiar friend. Looking back now, I realise how much of that feeling came from the story the brand built over decades. This idea that Kenko was the smooth, steady, gently crafted choice of British households and offices everywhere. It had history on its side. It had availability, visibility, and a calm sort of reputation that made it easy to trust. My routine with it was almost ritual. 1 spoon hot water, a quick stir, and a quiet sip before the morning had a chance to turn noisy. I liked how it felt simple. No punch, no sharpness, just a soft beginning to the day. In that quiet moment, I didn't ask for much more than that. It became a habit without ever needing to prove itself again, and habits are powerful like that. They make you think what you've always had is what you still have. But something shifted recently, and it happened in the smallest way. One morning, I took my sip without rushing, without checking my phone, without thinking about anything else. And for the first time in a long while, I tasted the cup properly. The smoothness was still there, but it felt strangely hollow, as if the flavour had been ironed out rather than shaped. The aroma lifted quickly and then vanished. The body felt thin. The finish didn't linger, it simply fell away. That was the moment I realised something wasn't right, and I couldn't unthink it. After digging further, the truth began to form. Smoothness in this case wasn't natural, it was engineered. Older beans, deeper roast profiles to hide inconsistencies, heavy blending to keep everything predictable, and stabilizers designed more for shelf life than sensory life. None of it broke rules, and none of it was dramatic, but it painted a picture that shook me more than I expected. Kenko built its identity on softness, but softness achieved through processing is not the same as softness born from good beans. Across the reviews, I saw comments echoing the same quiet disappointment I had felt. Tastes weaker than before. Aroma disappears fast, not the Kenko I remember. These weren't angry complaints. They were small heartbreaks typed out by people who, like me, trusted the brand for years. It wasn't about a single bad jar. It was about a slow shift that you only notice once you stop drinking on autopilot. Through that realization, my frustration surprised me. I wasn't upset because the coffee declined. Everything changes, everything rises and falls, and no brand owes us perfection forever. What caught in my chest was something else, the way Kenko continued to hold onto its old image, while the cup itself drifted further and further from it. A gap grew between what they once were and what they now want us to remember. On the marketing side, the illusion stayed polished, the warm amber packaging, the word smooth pressed onto every surface, the nostalgic messaging, the supermarket placement that whispers reliability. But once you taste the cup with honest focus, the shine feels thinner. Smooth, yes, unmistakably, but smooth in the way a stone is smooth after being worn down, not in the way it was carved with intent. Among co-workers, I started noticing something subtle. People weren't finishing their cups. Half-drunk mugs sat on desks cooling slowly. No one complained, but no one seemed eager for a second pour either. It was the kind of silent verdict you only notice when you feel the same thing yourself. On mornings like that, I realized I wasn't angry, just sad to watch something familiar lose its shape. And yet the feeling didn't leave me bitter. If anything, it left me determined. Before I move on, I'll say this much: even if one favorite fades, I won't stop looking for good coffee. There is always another cup worth finding. How to find good coffee. From this point, the only thing that matters is choosing with more attention than before. I say that gently because the disappointment I felt with the brands earlier didn't leave me bitter. It simply nudged me to look closer to notice what the cup was trying to tell me. When choosing your next coffee, that shift matters more than any label or price tag. It changes the way the day begins. When the noise falls away, the practical things start to make sense. Freshness is the first clue. Real coffee releases its aroma the moment the seal breaks. Not a quick puff that disappears, but a rounded scent that expands on its own, almost as if it wants to stretch into the room. And a genuine roasting volatile oils stay lively, shining lightly on the surface of the granules or beans, rather than hiding behind a dusty finish. A cup built from that kind of care tastes open and warm. The finish settles rather than collapsing into bitterness. In the clearer view, slogans don't help nearly as much as we hope. Words like premium gold, rich and smooth appear because they work, not because they describe what's inside. Strength numbers only tell you how dark the roast is, not how full the flavour will be. A dark roast can look confident on the shelf, but drink thinner than expected. Real depth comes from balance, not from how far the beans have been pushed. Across supermarket shelves, longer expiry dates aren't a mark of quality either. They often signal blends designed for endurance rather than nuance. Good beans don't need to survive a year untouched. They need honesty, a shorter journey, and less interference. When the blend is overly adjusted, the cup loses its shape long before it reaches your kettle. By small habits alone, you can find better coffee than you think. Read the back labels for roast transparency. Look for bags that mention origin rather than only flavour notes. Check for roasting windows instead of marketing lines. And when you bring it home, pay attention to that first scent because aroma reveals the truth faster than anything printed on the front. Among all of this, I keep a small moment close to me. I remember standing in the supermarket aisle after everything I'd learned, staring at the shelves without rushing. Eventually, I picked a bag that felt honest, not famous, not heavily promoted, just clear about what it was. When I opened it at home, the aroma rose softly, fuller than I expected. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't life-changing, but it carried a tiny spark of promise I hadn't felt in a while. Before ending, I want to say something simple. Great coffee still exists. It's not always on the highest shelf. It's not always in the brand with the longest history. Sometimes it's the humble bag that doesn't shout, the one made by people who care more about flavour than story. And if you pay attention, you'll find it one honest cup at a time. Coffee has its problems, and today we've walked through them without softening the truth. Some jars have slipped in quality, some brands have drifted from what they once were, and some blends rely more on memory than flavour. But none of that means you should give up on coffee itself. It remains a small but important part of daily life in this country. A pause before work, a warm moment in the kitchen, a quiet comfort in long afternoons. It has shaped routines, held conversations, and started countless days with something gentle and familiar. So don't let the disappointment end the story. Let it sharpen your awareness, not your frustration. With a bit of attention, a bit of patience, and a willingness to explore beyond old favourites, you can still find a cup that feels honest again. And when you do, it's worth every step it took to get there.
This video does not promote division within the United States or encourage segregation. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration, analysis, and fostering discussion based on current events, public sentiment, and social trends. We fully respect the United States Constitution and all federal regulations. If today's analysis made you think, drop a comment so we can keep the conversations going. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you will never miss our next independent deep dive.